not going to all have common experiences now. We're not even going to have a common view of what the Rebbe means to us. But the two things that are most important is one isn't important as to which way you're heading to, but another point is that you really can't do it alone. You have to connect with other chassidim.
Welcome to Homesick for Lubavitch, a podcast where we explore Lubavitch identity in the year 2023. My name is Bentzi and I will be your host. Let's begin. Yeah, so like we were discussing earlier, the point of this podcast, nobody's paying me to do it. Nobody's really asking me to do it. It's something that I'm doing from myself, and also a little bit for myself. Is to really discuss with people the question of Lubavitch identity in 2023. Now, one can ask, first of all, what does that even mean? And second of all, who cares? Right? Like, what does it mean? It means that every community, every group of people has a shared sense of who they are and what they're about, and individuals place themselves in that larger story that they all share, right? So you could go to the largest group, people identify as people, and then within that, men identify as men, and so on and so forth, until you get to smaller and smaller groups. Yidden identify as Yidden, right? That doesn't mean everybody's exactly the same, but it means that every Yid identifies with a larger picture, the obvious imais, and so on. So Lubavitch also has an identity, or had an identity. I mean, for sure has an identity today. It feels like there was once an identity that was a little bit simpler and more straightforward, and people would right away, if you asked them what does it mean to be Lubavitcher, they would say right away what it meant. And more or less people would kind of agree on what it meant. Today it feels like it's fragmenting and falling. I don't know if it's falling apart, but it's becoming more fragmented. People have their own ideas of what it means. So then the second question is, who cares? Like, right, why do you even need it in the first place? And what I think is that I think we need it more than we realize. To expect every individual to form for themselves from the ground up an entire understanding of who they are and what they're about is asking too much. There's a reason why we have these identities. It's not just, what they call social constructs that are just for power or whatever the critics like to say. It's what holds people together. It's what gives people a sense of place and a sense of meaning. And so I feel like there's a big challenge when the identity that so many of us share begins to come under pressure and begins to go its different ways. And so, the goal of the podcast is to not to necessarily come up with an answer. I don't think any of us have an answer, and I don't know if it's a question that demands a single answer. I think that's the whole point. I don't think anybody can give an answer or claim to speak for everybody. But I think by having conversations where people talk about what it means to them, we can see how things are kind of going in different directions, but also hopefully see the things that bring people together, and like what is the essence that still ties people together? What are people holding on to? What are people identifying with? What is important to them? Anyway, that was hopefully the longest part of the podcast of me talking. I did not fly to New Orleans to talk.
First of all, welcome to New Orleans, Bentzi.
Thank you.
And thank you for laying out the idea of what we're doing here today.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for agreeing to do this. I know I showed up in New Orleans to your home, but believe it or not, many people would be reluctant to do it, even if I made the same exact offer, and have been reluctant to do it. So I appreciate it. I appreciate it very much. So I figure in our conversation, a lot of people I've been speaking to before this and the other episodes, they're closer to my age. So we're talking about our understanding of Lubavitch from a little bit, essentially from a post-Gimel Tammuz perspective. We all grew up If we were born before that, we grew up after that, and so we see things from a different place. I think it would make sense in our case here for you to just talk a little bit about what was it like to grow up as a Lubavitcher, and just discuss a little bit your childhood, where you grew up, the general memories that you had.
Sure. So I grew up in Crown Heights, the Lubavitch family. I went to Ola Torah from as long as I remember, from preschool all through Shir Dalet and Zal, till I was 19. I went on Shlichus. Of course, a happy childhood. Things were centered around the Rebbe. And, my formative years were really the 4 years in Zal, between 15 and 19. Every bacher who was in Ola Torah, and so who learned next to the Rebbe, they look at those years as the golden years. Some say it was the puffs of the lamens of the mems. It just depends when you were there. But there was, in those years, when I was in Ola Torah, from 15 to 19, it's Tafshir Mem Beis through Mem Hey, so 82 through 85. That was a time where the Rebbe really was, I heard Yeska Greenberg define it like this, the Rebbe was like a Rav with his Talmidim. Every Shabbos, I should say almost every Shabbos is a Fabringen, and the Rebbe seemed like very patiently developing these ideas and explaining it until we got it, and expecting us to write our comments in the others and complaining how come nobody answered my questions, and how come nobody questioned what I said. If it's if there's a Gemara that says differently, it was a relationship with back and forth, but really it was good times. It was relatively calm times. The Rebbe had recovered from the events of Lamed Ches. The Rebbe's health was good, and he was there for us, and we were there for him. And there wasn't even business, there wasn't even dollars, but it was just we were constantly with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe was teaching us like a teacher. I left on Shlichus right after Tishrei Tavshin Mem Vav, and things took a marked change. Then it started with the trial with the Svarim, the intensity of the Dan Notzah, and then some other things that were going on in Lubavitch, and then the Rebbetzin, the stalkus of the Rebbetzin, and the Rebbe's push for Mashiach. But he needs to have a Rav, somebody you can ask besides him for counsel. And everything took a great intensity. The Farbrengens, the Rebbe seemed much more urgent and intense and shorter and getting right to the point. It was a different era. So I was in an era, really, in those years, the Shabbos Farbrengens would always go till 5:30. Winter or summer, winter went straight to Mayev. And it was of course, the Rebbe demanded from us a couple of times a year on Shabbos, never on weekday. The Rebbe would give Musa to the Bacher, by the way, never when it was on a mic.
Really?
Yeah, always was Shabbos. And often the Rebbe said it shouldn't be the Hanacha, but all the Bachrim had it, of course. I remember one Shabbos, Hanukkah, the Rebbe speaking about there's a lack of not enough connection, and that the Friedrich Rebbe said that Italy was a very disorganized country, and the way it expressed itself once, they had this big event showing off the first rail cars, what's it called, the first trains, locomotives to go, and everybody came with great fanfare and balloons, but they forgot to hook up the locomotive to the other cars. So the locomotive left the station, and the other cars remained. So the Rebbe said he heard that from the Friedrich Rebbe. So the Rebbe said, it's there needs to be more connection. Otherwise, Shabbos, I'm going to stay in my room, and you could be here. He said, Shabbos Varkim, I have a directive from the Rebbe Deshver to Fabring, I'm going to be here. But other than that, so that was very strong words, but it was said with a lot of love. But that was once or twice a year. But there was really a tremendous yachas as teacher and child, as teacher and student. So it was very wonderful growing up then. Everything was focused around the Rebbe and the latest Fabringen, and Shlichus was a very important fact, but it was a very important part of Lubavitch. It was just at the beginning of the Kinusia Shluchim. It wasn't, the Rebbe didn't speak about Chabad houses and Shlichus that much. That only started in the mid-mems. So it was mainly focused about being in the Rebbe's yeshiva and being the Rebbe's Dalet Amos and buying into the Rebbe's vision and program and learning and miftzayim and so on. It was, for us at least, those my age, it was the golden years. Yeah.
Right. But a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that, in general, people look back on life to their youth as golden years. And certainly if you're going to talk about it in the context of the Rebbe, so the Rebbe passed away after that. So you're certainly looking at a time that has a lot of nostalgia connected to it. But if we try to take if we try to go back in time, I wasn't there, obviously. You're talking about years before I was born. But like, for example, in your years, already, the Rebbe had stopped doing Yechidus, right?
I was in Yetidus for Bar Mitzvah.
Right, but not for Bachrim,
No,
right?
that's correct.
Right. So at the time, I mean, even though like today people would say, well, no problem, I go back to the time where there's no Yechidus, but at the time, was there a feeling of distance of, my father or my uncle or my older brother even, they had direct heroes, the Rebbe knew exactly who they were, they felt like they were seen. Was that something that...
That was a discussion, of course, because of Yetidus ending. I think we all believed that the Rebbe knew who we were, who we are as individuals, and there were a lot of stories to back it up. I think we were more focusing on how would we be if we had to face the Rebbe once a year and give a report to the state of how we're doing,
Mhm.
and with without any with when you walk into Yetidus, you present yourself the way you are, and we did not have that experience. And even though the Rebbe said again and again that if Farbrengen takes the place of that, it's very hard for us to feel that.
Mhm.
It was something you had to really work on to relate to. So it wasn't so much that we thought that the Rebbe was maybe a little more distant and didn't know us. It was were we responding. It's just like now. It's not, the Rebbe is of course here with us. The question is how much it takes a lot more effort for us to tap into it. You can say the same thing in our days in comparison to the days he did this.
The reason I'm asking is because, especially on the question of identity, you know, there's no question that so much of Lubavitch identity, especially with Dera Shvi, is very tied in to the Rebbe, right? It's
Sure.
you have less, it seems like when you look back in Lubavitch history, the Chassidim had more of their own personal identities. There were these big Chassidim and their stories about them. You had the Frierdiker Rebbe talking about Chassidim, right?
Right.
There was a different dynamic where Chassidim had their identities. They came to the Rebbe once every 10 years. Like the Rebbe was a madrich. It's a very different setup. Whereas in Der Shvi, the identity is a lot more tied closely around the Rebbe. Like what's the Rebbe saying, what's the Rebbe asking us to do, what each kufa very often is defined by the stage in the Rebbe's life. Like the way even you just laid it out before, how much things changed with Tevis, the Stalks, the Rebbetzin. These are personal
Sure.
events in the Rebbe's life, and you're seeing that as a change in your life, right? So that's why I'm asking. It's one thing when your identity is tied to the Rebbe, but there's a personal sense to it. You have a Yechidus, Rebbe tells you to do X, Y. It's not just if the Rebbe knows who you are, but you know what the Rebbe wants from you in that moment. And then you go to a space where your identity is still very much revolving around the Rebbe, but it's in a less personal way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So of course, with not having Yechidus, that definitely is something that was in our consciousness. It was not like we were not coming into the Rebbe's room, giving a zettel about where we are. We know that Hall used to give in reports, and we know from time to time the Rebbe, even in the mems, would react to the reports and and so on. But you're absolutely correct about that. There was a big focus of what we spoke about and what we felt. But again, it was more from our perspective. Where are we? Where would we be if we had Yechidus? And then realizing that Rebbe was really trying to drive home that you can be in the same place in the relationship if you work on it. I have, in fact, a good friend who wrote to the Rebbe. He's not a Spitz Chabad. He's a very good friend of mine. Just like he really sincerely wanted to go into Yetidus, and he longed to have the experience of what the Bachrim just maybe less than 10 years older than us had. And he wrote a letter to the Rebbe that he feels that he's lacking Yetidus, and if he had a one-on-one Yetidus, the relationship and his Aveda would be greater. And the Rebbe wrote him back a letter. And it's a letter that now is already well known. And the Rebbe writes to him that, I'm surprised that it didn't come to you, what I've said many, many times, that Yechidus Klolos takes the place of Yechidus, and being that it's in a Beis HaKnesses and Beis Medrash, it has even more potency for the relationship. And so, a letter from the Rebbe came in the stationery. He wasn't in New York then. He was with me in South Africa at the time, together with Yudi as well. And the Rebbe sent him a letter, like everybody else, with his name, with the Rebbe's signature. And so I think the focus was more where we were in the relationship, as opposed to the Bachrim that were 10 years older than us. And just an interesting story. A friend of mine heard once, and I went to check the video. They were bringing, I think it was Tavshim test. They were in the sukkah all night, and the Bachrim were talking about this very issue. Does the Rebbe really know? We know the Rebbe cares about us and what we're doing in our Aveda, and how we're learning. But does the Rebbe know us personally, like 15 years ago when there was Yechidus? So there was a person from Kfar Chabad who had just come to the Rebbe for, this was Chalamet Sukkos. He had just come for Sukkos and Simchas Torah, and he said, I'm a chassid of the Rebbe, I'm a shliach of the Rebbe, I believe it all, but I can't believe that the Rebbe knows me personally, as when I went in, and I said, here I am, Moshe ben Yitzchak, with these and these things. So when he was going by for Yechidus Klolis, I saw the video. Out of nowhere, it's not a secret. He says his name is Moshe Edry. He was at that time from Kfar Chabad. He was working at Sefel Mlacha. He goes by the Rebbe. Hundreds of people go by, and the Rebbe calls him back. And the Rebbe says, "You're Moshe Edry from Kfar Chabad." He says, "Yeah." And from Sefel Mlacha, he gives him extra $, says, to help with the hitzos of your trip. So,
But that's not. But here's a problem. I've heard these kind of stories growing up. And of course they're extrapolated to after Gimel Tammuz. It's the same thing. Makan imin mashamish, masham imin mashamish, afkan imin mashamish. Right, the same idea. But that only answers really if the Rebbe knows who you are. It doesn't answer if you know that the Rebbe knows who you are. Right? I mean, it's at the end of the day, the fact the Rebbe is a different kind of person, right? So by definition, he knows things that you don't know. Relationships work differently. But the point of Yechidus in the past was so that the person, right, the person had his time or her time with the Rebbe and did not have to somehow live up to this essentially impossible standard of Ruach HaKodesh. And the Rebbe says that the base medrash is even more potent. But I don't feel that. Right, the person who walked into the Rebbe's Yechidus room, not every person, but a lot of the people that walked in felt something. Here it's harder, right? So I mean, that to me has always been. But look, I'm not looking to be convinced. I'm not looking to, that's. I feel the more interesting question here for me is, why do you think Lubavitch became so focused on this personal relationship? I mean, part of it, of course, is historical, that the Rebbe did have these Yechidim with Bachrim on a regular basis, which I don't know if it existed in the past. Lubavitch had become much smaller for a bunch of years, right? In the early years, there was only a few Bachrim in New York. But it does seem that
the Rebbe had Yechidus with women, which previous Rebbeim didn't have,
right, exactly,
and so on. There was
100%,
right,
100%, and people would come in as children, then they come in as bar mitzvah bachrim, then they come in as bachrim, they come in as couples. Right. So that's for sure part of it, but there's also the sense where not once upon a time, a generation before that, the Frierdiker was talking about Chassidim, right? Chassidim are talking about Chassidim, and then it seems to just everything just begins to revolve solely around the Rebbe, right? And just even the very thing that we're talking about now, where as Bachrim in the Mems, you're talking about how it used to be that we'd go into Yechidus and what kind of difference that makes, right? That also shows how much was connected to the personal. It's not the personal even. How much was revolved around the Rebbe right? What do you think changed?
So I'm not the big balashkafa here. Rabbi El explains the skashus is not an emtsoi, it's not a means to an end, it's an end in itself. Of course, with Aveda, with doing what we should be doing, that's way above my my pay grade to be able to explain the hashkafa of it or the hasbara of it. The first thing we see is that the Rebbe focused more on his iskashus with the Frierdiker Rebbe more so than the other Rebbeim. And what's interesting is that the Rebbe was much more guarded about speaking about himself. The Frierdiker Rebbe spoke about his life and stories that happened to him all the time, and he wrote about it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they're amazing, narratives that he gave over from his own life. And the Rebbe was very guarded, much more private. But when it came to his relationship with the Frierdiker Rebbe and his iskashus, and if he heard something, like how many times you heard from the Rebbe, if I heard it from the Rebbe the Shver, that's all I need. That's it. We can, that's the path paved that we can go on. I think the Rebbe spoke a lot more about iskashus than the previous Rebbeim. So obviously that became ingrained in us. And if you want to get into a little bit more mystical things, we talk about Malchus, the seventh generation, which of course that we know the Rebbe said we are. And the seventh Sfira is Malchus. And Malchus is, we don't have that much on our own, in our own Avodah. There's nothing so outstanding except that we're ready to receive what's coming from higher from us. I mean, it's just where our generation is. Now, the Rebbe, of course, emphasized this is Chabad, think on your own, do on your own. I mean, from the first Farbringen, Yud Shvat, right after the Maimer, don't convince yourself anything that anybody's going to do to work for you. Till the Mashiach campaign, you're going to have to bring Mashiach. It's going to have to be, you're going to have to say Ad Mosai, I really mean it. There's no question that the Rebbe didn't want we should just hang on his coattails. There's nothing the Rebbe wanted more than we should have stakes in this project, that we should feel it, we should think it, but all through through the lens of Iskashus. I mean, it is the beginning. As far as after Gimel Tammuz, for me, for sure, it's a big challenge, because when I had to, in a way, if I'd come Shabbos to Farbringen and be 15 feet away from the Rebbe, and then once every few weeks say L'chaim, and once every couple of months go for $1, you have to keep yourself in check a little bit and keep yourself, it's an external motivation that's very strong. And I can't say that I fully, and we could have it now, but I'm not saying that I'm there. It's a big challenge for me. But you have to see, it's just like Lubavitch itself, the Meistis, became apparent after Gimel Tammuz that this thing is growing and growing and continuing to grow and continuing to expand with new challenges, which every living organism that's growing has challenges. That's self-understood. The same thing you see with the Bakrim. Well, obviously, we have more challenges today in our generation. Every Frum community has it, and we have it, and we can't put our head in the sand. We also have a lot of Bakrim that they feel they have, that Hiskashus is very important to them. Their relationship with the Rebbe is very important to them. Younger Bachrim and some older Bachrim, and not just from one stream, not just from Detroit or Brinois, but from various yeshivas in the middle. So there's they're feeling something. They're like, it's their excitement is to find some new reshima from the Rebbe, some new answer from the Rebbe, story from the Rebbe, and that's their enthusiasm, and it's really real to them. And for some people in my generation, even for myself, sometimes it's a little bit hard to you're coming from a Zman of Eir, and you're getting excited about such a thing, but no, it's really real for them. I think they're really dealing with their relationship with the Rebbe. So I mean, say the proof is sometimes the proof is not always in the lab. It's sometimes out there in the field when you see the way the Bachrim are.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that there isn't some emes here. If I felt that there wasn't something valuable, I wouldn't be that interested to figure out what to hold on to. You know what I mean? That's not at least for me the question. That's not for me the pressing issue. But I mean, a couple of things in what you just said. I mean, like the idea of Malchus, of course, I heard that when I was in yeshiva, but when we translate that into English, when we translate it into like reality, it goes from being a very beautiful spiritual idea to, if I was to translate to English, I would talk about how impoverished we are spiritually, right? There's no, essentially what it ends up being is you go from being, you talked earlier how in your days you felt like you were Talmidim Ta'arav. You go from there to being Avadim Ta'melech, or at the very best, soldiers in an army, which by definition, a soldier in an army is just a number. An army cannot operate if they're concerned about the individual as an individual. No army in the history of the world ever won with that kind of mindset. You have to be ready to throw millions or hundreds of thousands of soldiers on the beach and lose a third of them or more. Right? That's the definition of an army. That's what makes an army so powerful, but that's what makes individuals so weak in a war or in an army, right? So when you talk about Malchus, on one hand, sounds beautiful, right? But when we translate it, the flip side of it can be very, I don't know the word disturbing, but dispiriting. So what does that mean? That means that our generation, um, we have nothing to ourselves. The best we can do is just not hang on to the coattails, but kind of what's what word halten auf
The
auf den
Klamke.
Klamke, right? And I mean, it feels like you cannot have it both ways, right? Like, so I understand what you're saying about how the Rebbe himself, um, had an extraordinary kind of iskashrus that's very hard to explain, and like where it came from, especially that the Rebbe came from a family that wasn't particularly close with the Frierdiker ever, right? Like that was the history. There was a little bit of friction there, and the Rebbe didn't go to Tenchet Mimim, and it was much later on in his life. Maybe that's the reason. Who knows? But the iskashrus is definitely very different.
If I could give you anecdotes
Sure.
just to get. So the Rebbe's father and the Rebbe's family. I don't know if friction is the right word, but the Rebbe says about his father, he was the greatest chassid of the Rebbe Rashab.
Right.
Of course, we understand with the Frierdiker Rebbe, it was a little bit of a different situation. Not chas v'shalom that we don't understand, but there's things. And why the Rebbe didn't see the Rebbe Rashab even till he was 18, and why the Rebbe didn't go to him, whatever it was. Avram Mayer used to come here often, by the way. He used to
New Orleans.
Yeah, to New Orleans. He used to raise money for the yeshiva and he used to come. And Zelik, in fact, there's an anecdote one time, by the way. There was a Mardi Gras parade and he was leaving Zelik Rifkin's house where he went to eat and he was going to the place he was staying and he passed by the parade and he actually got a prize for his costume. The way he looked with his beard. But anyway, Zelik told me that he once told him, he said, he had a little bit of a different way of thinking of things. He says, I'm trying to figure out the Rebbe, obviously such a genius and a Goin Olam with a whole philosophy and a shtel when he came to Frierdiker Rebbe. And who was he taught by? His father. Goin HaGoinim, tzaddik among tzaddikim. And the Rebbe was very connected to his father. And in other words, he didn't come as first Amalchus to the Frierdiker Rebbe.
Right.
He was a complete tzir. And something happened where he connected to the Frierdiker Rebbe and became completely bottle, like the biggest chassid without any, in the place of the Frierdiker Rebbe's, even a hunch. That's, a half a minute by the previous Rebbe's, by the Rebbe, a command. He was just saying, he said, what happened? He sometimes, imagines himself, what happened that the whole tzir that the Rebbe had, which was so important to his identity even later, but somehow everything was put aside to be a chassid for his kashrus. So just adding that in when you put into that.
Well, it's good to know. Baruch Shekivanti. It's good to know that. It's good to know. I mean, even with all the family,
your families didn't always get along.
I think
that was all in good spirit.
I think at this point, we can all move on.
I think so. I agree.
Bigger fish to fry.
That's right.
But so look, my question is not if it's right or wrong. Like you said before, it's above my pay grade to decide. What should iskashrus look like? What is it b'chlal? What is it today? And what was it 100 years ago? That's not the question. And anyway, we're not going back in time. So it's kind of irrelevant. Right. But the question is more, what does that mean? Right? Because we can dress it up in fancy Kabbalistic language. And I'm not suggesting that people are doing that to lie or to be deceptive. But you can very quickly make a nice spiritual explanation to it. But I think we also have to face the reality that there's a flip side to it, which is as the focus is turned more and more to the Rebbe, and your identity of a Lubavitcher is connected more and more to your relationship to the Rebbe as opposed to your own avodah and your own tzir and your own personhood, it does seem like that would lead to people becoming more part of a group that's surrounding the Rebbe, like an army around the general, and less individualized, less realized as individuals, and more impoverished as individuals, spiritually speaking. And then the question becomes, where does that lead?
So there is, obviously, that's a lot of strength. His kashrus is a strength, and the focus on the Rebbe we're talking about, maybe to some people it's a crutch, but for most people it's a strength. But it does lead to certain places that are challenging or even problematic. For example, for those that emphasize, I have no problem with a parent or yeshiva focusing on the goal of all this. We should be the Rebbe's mentioned, be a Shliach, and that's However, when we make it that is the only model of Lubavitch that is making it's putting the Rebbe in a box that the Rebbe did not, I think, want to be put in. Not that, believe me, I'm very proud that our 4 married children are on Shlichus. And I'm sure they heard it even openly, but certainly, they felt it that would be wonderful. But they never heard from us that this is the only way, because the Rebbe has a very, very big tent, and it's real. There's no first tier and second tier. There's the Shlichus to bring Mashiach, and in the Shlichus to bring Mashiach, it's a special privilege to be a Shliach. But everybody has their role, and otherwise, the fact that the Rebbe told some people to take other paths is significant, and even more significant is the reality. The Rebbe is not the Rebbe of half of Chassidim or a third of Chassidim. Everyone has their place in Lubavitch and in this mission. And there's only first tier. Is it a special privilege to be a shliach? Yes. Is it a nachas for me that my kids are on shlichus? Yes. But if my child would be a tzidisha balabas with a mission and everything like that, and the Rebbe is, what the Rebbe wants is really at the forefront of the consciousness, that would be, these are chassidim that are completely in tune with the Rebbe. And then there's all kinds of other expressions. There are some chassidim. The fact that Lubavitch is so diverse probably shows that with all of this kashus, I'm not sure if this is purely what the Rebbe had in mind, that it needs to be Chabad, and we have to use our own seichel and midas, and we have to take our own initiative, and it has to resonate with us. Maybe we've gone very broad, okay, but the general idea, for some people, maybe they're not doing Chittas and Rambam, but you know what? If somebody offends the Rebbe, puts down the Rebbe, boy, they're going to take it personally as if you offended their father, or just how proud they are of the Shlichus enterprise, as David Chase used to call it, or they're going to send their kids to Armistice, or whatever it is, or they're going to give tzedakah the way the Rebbe said to give. There's many. In other words, the iskashus to the Rebbe does take many forms, and it's not, and that also shows that we haven't lost our individuality completely. Iskashus is to pick ourselves up to a higher ideal, to be connected to the Rebbe, but as the Rebbe wanted, it should be each person and each community according to where they're at and according to their personalities and their talents and their sheidish hanashama, if you say. So there is within iskashus, there's many different ways it takes shape. And
what would you say is, you said if your child wasn't on shlichus and they were Chassidish Yid, what would you say would define them as a Lubavitcher? Because when it comes to shlichus is almost, in the question of Lubavitch identity, shlichus is a cheat code, right?
Is a what?
It's a cheat code. It's like, it's an obvious answer. I'm
Right,
shliach.
right.
Period. End of story.
Right,
They're shlichim before Gilun Thomas, they're shlichim today.
Right.
My whole life revolves around doing the Rebbe's mission.
Right.
The answer is clear. Right. But once you're not on shlichus, what would you say would define someone as a Lubavitcher chassid today?
So I'm a little bit of a disadvantage because I don't live in an Anash community, and it's not it's not something I'm busy with every day. There's like the shluchim that have hundreds of Anash.
So let me frame
The
the question
proximity.
differently. You said you would be fine if one of your children was on shlichus but was a Chassidish Yid. What does that mean? What does that look like to you? That image?
I made it very clear that it's a great nachas for us to have children on shluchas. But if it was a person that for whatever reason he was working, and he obviously, if it manifested himself that he's doing at least a Perek Rambam and Chitas, and he goes to Fabrengens and he visits and they visit the oil many times in the year, and they send their kids to our meisters and things like that, then it's not a question. I mean, the Rebbe is directing their whole life. But I think that there's different expressions of that as well. We have this term of look, Lubavitch is a very broad place. There's a lot of different kinds of people. Like every frum community, we have a segment that their system's not speaking to them. They're checking out, and that that segment's not getting smaller. It's very painful. It's actually very scary as a parent, as a shliach, as a Lubavitcher. Now, the fact that every frum community is dealing with it is a chatzi nechama at best.
Tzarav nechama.
Right. Okay. So it at least tells us that it's not something that we're doing, wrong, but something we all have to address. It's serious, and for sure, if
Hmm.
there's something that's not giving the Rebbe rest, it's these kids that are not, the system's not speaking to them at best. And we know in my days, if somebody checked out of the system, maybe this is stereotypical because it wasn't 100% then either. Often it was a person that was having issues with their parents, or their parents were either not loving enough or trying to shove Chassidishkeit down their throats. And today we understand that it's totally not the situation.
I mean,
The best loving.
some people understand that. Some people claim punkt the opposite, and I agree with you.
I see many loving, normal, well-adjusted families where this is the reality of today. It's a scary and painful reality. And I went all the way to that very painful thing because my head's not in the sand. When I check in on one of the Chabad websites every few days, and I see this 20-year-old Lubavitcher suddenly passed away, it goes through my mind: was it was it a drug? Was it a overdose?
Hmm.
Was it something that they took their own lives? And what's the difference? The pain for it is because the pain for the parents could be even more because they start second guessing themselves, which is, we know today that's not true, but that doesn't matter
Right.
what the truth is. So we have that aspect as well, and the Rebbe's not resting, and we can't rest. But that is one it's where the world is today. It's not where it was 20 years ago. It's not where it was 50 years ago. But you have so many grades of people in the system. They're in the Rebbe system. It expresses itself in different ways. There's an anecdote I had. I was in Tel Aviv for a Shabbos this summer. And
Nice. I met you in the airport on the way.
yeah, it could be. I came when I landed in Atlanta. Yeah.
met you in the
I was on the
Atlanta
way back.
airport.
I think I was on the way or on the way back.
You're on
I
the
don't
way.
remember.
You're on the way there.
Okay, you remember. So I was
I
probably
could.
rushing to my plane.
No, you were not coming off an international flight.
Okay.
You were coming.
I didn't look like a zombie.
No.
So I spent Shabbos in Tel Aviv. And, there's a lot going on now in Tel Aviv, but that's for a separate discussion, what I experienced at Shabbos. But I was in a place called Chabad at the Coast. Very nice place. A lot of young Americans or young from English-speaking people from different diverse groups coming there. Maybe a couple of hundred young people. The Shliachim are doing a great job. There were also at least 20 people from Lubavitch, men and women who were people who had struggled with the system, had gone out a little bit, and some would come back. They come there regularly. They feel at home over there, and it's wonderful. So I was there the Shabbos before Gimel Tammuz. So there's one fellow and his friend. His friend is in Yerushalayim. They were both in the army together. His friend is with the Kapata, and he's definitely with the program. They were in the army. He told, as soon as we sit down, they came to speak to me because they want to hear a Shliach, what a Shliach has to say the Shabbos before Gimel Tammuz. Already is. So the fellow who lives in Tel Aviv says, I just want to tell you, I'm not Orthodox. I think he said, I'm not frum. I just want you should know. It's very. So we're having this beautiful conversation. Then the friend from Yerushalayim, who's obviously with the program, says, I just want to say one thing about my friend. He says he's not frum, and that's true. But you should know that it's already 7 years that he puts on film at least almost every day. And it's already 2 years that he comes here almost every Shabbos. He said, and the fellow from Tel Aviv said, yeah, I can't go 2 weeks without being at the Chabad house here. And so he's not, just keep that in perspective. He says he's not frum, but so then this fellow from Tel Aviv tells me, this young Lubavitcher, he says, yeah, truthfully, I'm not as non-Orthodox as I was 7 years ago. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
So we're very, very, there's a lot going on a lot of different levels. And those who can feel the Rebbe's Ava to everyone can appreciate that. Again, these are these are areas with people that had trouble with the system. Alas Kamvakama, in the system, you have all kinds of groups of people who they might not be shluchim, and they might, the shirt that they're wearing might not look like mine, but come on, these are chassidim. They come every Shabbos to shul. They have some l'chaim. They want to know what it means. That's the Shabbos before Gimel Tammuz, or how do you get ready as Lubavitch of Rosh Hashanah? And there's a lot. There's discussions, this connection. but it's taking a lot of forms, a lot of individuals, and especially of niches, of groups in different ways.
So,
I see the cup as more than half full.
no, I'm not trying to push you into a pessimistic corner. And the
Of
truth is,
course.
as I get older, a lot of people, at least for me, people that knew me predicted I'd get more pessimistic, just based on my personality. And the truth is, I get less pessimistic because I think a lot of pessimism comes from expecting too much or wanting too much, and so you're inevitably gloomy about that happening, and then you realize, well, life's a little bit more complicated, and maybe your ideals or what you would like idealistically is ridiculous to begin with. You have to understand there's more at play. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know, but I'm certainly not trying to push
Sure.
into a pessimistic corner. The question though
I
is,
didn't feel you are.
uh,
So.
good. The question though is, um, where does this lead? Because as people really fragment and you say like, look, here's a Lubavitcher who he still has a shaykhus in some form. We don't really understand it necessarily, but something is pulling him back. Something's pulling him back to come to shul. This person doesn't keep kosher, but he still feels a connection to something he learned in yeshiva. I mean, there are all kinds of
Right.
different shapes. There's no question that, from what I can tell, that even 30 years ago, someone left, they pretty much left. It was the door was more one way. Like once you walked out, it was very hard to come back in, and you walked out with more of like a conviction that I'm not part of this anymore. Whereas today, for good or for worse, people are I don't have to leave entirely. I could leave part of it. I could still stay. I could keep some connection. I could, so things are certainly more fluid. Like to say, like Kadam Rinchi, more fluid. But where does that lead? At some point, that that makes it harder and harder to say what does it mean to be a Lubavitcher? Because, well, if that person's a Lubavitcher and that person's a Lubavitcher and their lives look so different, what does that word mean, right? So I feel like the only thing that you could say is, well, they both go to the oil at least once a year, right? Or they both love the Rebbe or something like that. But that leads us back to our earlier question: is that really an identity, or is that just holding on to the Rebbe's identity, right?
That's a great question. Definitely, in the golden era, in the good old days. So wherever a bacher learned, he ended up in 7-7, and so there was that common thing. The last year or two as a bacher, you were in 770, or you went through the same similar situations. Today, it's not necessarily the case. It is. That's a great question where it leads, because on one aspect you could say, what do we all have in common? On the other hand, the Rebbe, nobody was as clear about so many issues as the Rebbe. And although probably need to be a Beni of Tanya to be able to live up to every one of those, to make a suffer, to increase in something good at each time in the suffer. But if we're generally trying to take direction from the Rebbe's life, and like the Rebbe would always say, if we're moving forward, then that is a very active connection to the Rebbe. And hopefully, and one has to realize that they do have to connect with other Chassidim. You're right. There's a lot of we're not going to all have common experiences now. We're not even going to have a common view of what the Rebbe means to us. But the two things that are most important is one is important as to which way you're heading to, but another point is that you really can't do it alone. You have to connect with other Chassidim on your level, other Chassidim a little bit more inspired. That's why you have a Rav, a Chaver, and other Chassidim that are maybe not as inspired as you. Everybody needs to be part of some kind of community. That's what I feel. I feel it's really important. And you have today with I love the class shuls and Kranheits. I think it's a great thing.
Really?
Yeah, I do
Why?
think. Because it gives a lot of people that would slip completely out are part of a community. They have friends that they say l'chaim with, and many of them come for davening, not all, but it gives them a sense of belonging. Obviously, If we didn't have this and people were in larger places or in different places or mixing with older chassidim or some more people in 770 or by the oil on Shabbos, would there be advantages to that? Yeah, but I think on the whole, it's an advantage. It has a lot more people involved. And you see, because when I'm in Crown Heights, I often daven at these shuls. You see the camaraderie, and that goes a long way. And in some way, the camaraderie is connected to our identity as Lubavitchers. It is different. It's not the same, not only because L'chaim is there, it's not the same as in other communities, And
Yeah, there's no question. There's no question that there's something holding people together. A lot of it
right,
is social. A lot of it is a shared shared families. We know each other growing up.
right,
But there's so many layers to that. Some of them are more, let's say, substantive than others. But there's certainly a lot of connective tissue there, and a lot. That's why a lot of people hold on to it, even if they feel less and less compelled to for, let's say, religious reasons. But they feel like for a social reason they want to hold on to it.
right.
But let if
But
yeah,
that's true, 100% true. But there are also a lot of people in this situation who are not so involved or in their, they don't look at themselves as someone who's like either you call them a Chassidish younger man or somebody who's like motivating. But today, more and more people are going to even from Anash, going to class once a week with their friends, to hear what the Rebbe said, or want to hear a word, want somebody to come to Fabring with them from Yom the Pagra. The connection is one where there. It's not just social. Again, I'm saying this as really someone from a distance, so I might be off. I want to add one other.
sure.
Go
No,
for it.
no, go
One
for
other
it.
perspective which we didn't bring up, and really it's very painful, and it doesn't have to be elaborated, just to be mentioned here. And I don't feel you're directing me in a pessimistic way at all, but part of my optimism also comes in because after Gimel Tammuz was a very traumatic time for us on many, many levels. The split in Lubavitch was real. It was intense. It was almost total. And some of the remnants of that effect are still there. By that time, it was very, very difficult. It looked almost as if it's splitting apart. And it started with the Mashiach issue, but we know it was not the only issue.
We also know it didn't start with that. There were fights
There were
before.
fights
That's
before.
pretty much along the same identical lines.
I want to mention your Zayda and one thing that Avram Shem Tov, of course, a speech he gave, and the Rebbe made him the head of the most important Chabad organizations, and he doesn't come with a whole organization like some of the other leaders. He doesn't have a whole infrastructure, but he has. The Rebbe, of course, knew what he was doing. I'm going to tell you a speech that he gave that really was very, very a moment of almost turnaround in Lubavitch. We had a very big split, and among the Meshachist group, there were some who were very. I identified for many years as a Meshachist. And I'm not sure I still had conversion therapy. I still, but there were a lot of excesses, and a lot of excesses that had a lot of repercussions for consequences for Hadassah Chassidim. There were some people that were out there, and then at the first few years, together with the split in Lubavitch, when there's such a strong split, your opponents see the opportunity. So there was a very strong movement to ban, and only Lubavitcher that will clearly state what his opinion is on this issue can be a sheitet, can be a mashgiach, he can even talk to, can be considered for a minion. That's gone now completely, but there was a lot of pushback.
Yeah, I remember. I'm old enough to
Okay,
remember
you're old enough
this.
to remember that. Yezeda got it by Kinnis HaShluchim, and we know that Yezeda was personally supportive of the Vader Bnei Chabad announcements of what's correct to do with the Rebbe and what things are not correct. And they were very clear, even if they didn't put it in every newspaper, they did in some, of what they thought of those who were very radical. Yezeda got up and he directly responded to this call of these people, and he said, "We'll deal with it internally. We don't need you to dictate to us as to who's a Lubavitcher and who's not a Lubavitcher, who's a Frumiyid and who's not a Frumiyid, who can be trusted, whose wine you can drink and whose wine you can't drink. We'll deal with it internally. We can handle it. Lubavitch can deal with it." And I think you never want to give too much importance, and it's not about a single speech. Some of the excess still, could be on different sides in Lubavitch, but compared to what it was, we're much more one movement and one family now. than we were in a revealed way, in an open way, than we were 30 years ago. And I think that was, to me, that was very comforting. We're not going to go into a civil war in public.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not going to just take a third of Lubavitch or 40%, 50% of Lubavitch, say, you're out, we're out, you're in, you're in. We're going to deal with this, and we're going to grow, and we're going to build. And we're not always going to agree. We're not even always going to agree on what's acceptable or not. But we're gonna persevere. We're gonna build, and I think we've made tremendous strides in that regard. There's a lot less division than there was. I'm talking about in a global about scale. I mean, almost there was different meisters and different Yom Tevim that they kept, and different everything was like it was like so crazy. That's not there now anymore.
Yeah, families didn't marry each other.
Right.
Families didn't talk to each other.
Like you said, I think we've moved on. Like you said before, yeah. For the most part.
For the most part. I mean, time does heal. Time does heal. Oh, and I think I think I can agree with that. That on certainly on that level, a lot of the reasons for division have seemed to go away, and people are, Fart, this guy is somebody I identify with.
Right.
So why would I look at that other stuff? And in terms of a common identity, that's that's certainly a hopeful thing.
Correct.
Yeah, it's certainly not gloomy, but I think look, I don't want to keep on going this theoretical direction of what this identity will end up being, because we don't really know. None of us know. But let's circle back for a little bit to what it was, because, and let's try to demystify it a little bit. It's very easy to say back in the day in 770, the golden years. I'm not saying that I don't believe you that that's how you feel. But in the time, we're I'm sure there were ups and downs.
Of course.
Tuesday was Tuesday, Wednesday was Wednesday.
Of course.
You mentioned a line earlier that to listen to every Hira of the Rebbe and to follow every Hira of the Rebbe is impossible, because Rebbe expected so much. I heard a story. I don't know if it was about you. Was the story Masechta Shavuos about you, like 2 days before Shavuos? Who was that about you? Who was that about? Do you know who it was?
What's the story? Tell us.
About the Rebbe saying to learn Masechta Shavuos for Shvir Seimer, and like a couple days before Shavuos, 2 Bachrim hadn't learned it.
It was not me.
Who was it?
I don't know.
You heard the story.
Yeah. So what's that?
So now I regret coming to New Orleans. No, I'm kidding. No, I think. I heard a story from somebody. It was about a Nemes, but there's only you and your brother, right?
Yeah.
And your other brother's older.
Yeah, it's not. It's probably not him either.
Maybe the story never happened.
Okay. Well, what's the story?
No, that the Rebbe said to learn Masechta Shavuos
for
Shvir Seimer, and it was only a few days before Shavuos. So a couple of Bachrim sat down and learned the whole. Like 2 Bachrim sat down and learned the whole Masechta in 2 days, 3 days. I think I heard about you, so maybe the story never even happened, or maybe it's about another Bachar. But to me, that was just an illustration of like, there's sometimes everyone would say things where it's like, I mean, there are stories where things did
seem
like
impossible.
we have to print a krach of the Kotasichas in 3 weeks,
Right.
and or do this. I mean, you brought up my grandfather. I mean, the stories I heard from him about Washington D.C., like do this, do that, like
seemed impossible.
Yeah, and sometimes and sometimes they were. Those stories get less press, but sometimes it didn't happen. Or the person wasn't able to make it happen. But what was it like? Because I was reading the other day a letter from Nechama Greisman. Actually, there was a book printed of her writings, and most of it wasn't exactly stuff that I was interested in reading, to be honest. But there was this one letter that I think it ended up getting published. I don't remember, but she was hesitating to publish it or not because she didn't want it to seem like she was being negative or kvetching. But she was like, it was almost like a letter written to the Rebbe, but written in a magazine, where like, I wish, I'm a mother giving birth to a bunch of children. I have a large family. As it is, I'm overwhelmed. Now I'm pregnant, and then on my way to the hospital, my husband tells me about a new mitzvah, and like, can I have a moment, please? And it would be so great if they would tell me when I can take some time off. And I was like, yeah. So like, people were not angels back then, right? So what was it like back then I'm trying to see how I could frame it as a question. Like, like describe a little bit, maybe the tension between being a regular bacher growing up. Your son's a bacher in 770 now, so you have a reminder of some of
Yeah.
the the limitations of a bacher, and this figure of a rebbe who's demanding so much. What was that like?
So I think the main tension, if you're a Chassidish bacher, which I probably was considered a Chassidish bacher, whatever that means, the main tension really becomes when you get married and you go out into the world and you have to accept. It's not only for your work; you become part of Elam Haza a little bit. It was very clear that Rebbe's vantage point is Einid Mulvadri. There's only Hashem. You're not created only to serve the Eibishter. I mean, when you hear the Rebbe saying it's not a need of you're created to serve Hashem. You're not here other than to serve Hashem. Again, only hear it, and you hear that again and again. It becomes it's pretty absolute, and you hear the Rebbe never took a vacation. Is it on our level? No, but every second has to be used, and of course we don't live up to that, and we have a Yitzhara, etc., etc. When you get married, then you start realizing that, of course, these are all truisms, but you have to do certain, part of your Avodas Hashem has to be to take care of yourself, to take care of your family, to relate to other people.
L'shavet
Sitzara, which so that's where the tension really comes in.
There was one second, I have to interrupt you. There was no tension as a bacher. Like looking back, there was no
tension in bacher. Maybe that I fell short of this ideal, but the ideal, like how do you do that?
There was no tension that ever expects me to learn Nigla, Chassidus, and there was spoken such I remember there was this krach we had in yeshiva. I forget. Do you remember what it was called? Maybe it was probably after your days. It was like all the Rebbe's Eros to Bachrim, but completely taken out of context. Yeah. But completely taken out of context, just the Eros. So there'd be, let's say there must have been a whole sikha about learning, and then at the end there was said that every Bacher should learn the whole
15 minutes.
Yeah, or no, like a Bacher who doesn't know Shas and Tosfos is a bizayin on the Rebbeim, and you get it in a line, but it's a line between that and knowing the whole Shagas Aryeh.
I don't know. So you could say there was tension. There were very great expectations. Maybe there was some tension. The Rebbe at the same time always was so fatherly and so loving, and you felt very uplifted around the Rebbe, even with your imperfections. You came to Fabrik and you came out feeling uplifted. Whether that week you didn't live up to, just each week we tried to do at least what the Rebbe said the week before. And there was some tension because you couldn't even sometimes live up to that. But if you made a genuine effort and you and you came the next week to Fabrik and you were uplifted again. So it's hard to say. There's no question that it's a very absolute. Chabad is a very absolute hashkafa. It's a very total hashkafa. It's accepting of everyone. Should be Metairie Nemes. Really have Avos Yisrael and see the milas, see the qualities and the goodness and the milas in each person and the goodness and everything. And at the same time, it's pretty intense philosophy. It's pretty total. Yeah. So there's always going to be tension. And
especially the Rebbe's philosophy.
Yeah, no question. So if a bacher was a little bit nervous, there were some bacherim that were a little bit nervous just because of that. So that's taka that they needed to relax a little bit. See, today I think the Hanhol Yeshiva.
But how did you? But I think it's a very important point because it has a lot of ramifications to today. How did you? It's because on one hand it's much easier. I'm a Lubavitcher. Yeah, I'm a little bit of a shvacha bacher, but the Rebbe's here. I do what he says, so it kind of gets covered up. But there's a tension that you have to deal with, which I think people have to deal with today as well. Part of the challenge of identity today is if because so much of the Lubavitch identity is tied up to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe was so absolute,
right?
Is a second that I don't live up to that. Even the dogma we were talking about earlier, the Rebbe at the end of the day wanted everybody to go on shlichus. That's what as you said, that's what he wanted. Right. Obviously, he understood that not everybody's going to go, but that's what he wanted. So we're ready. The bar is up here. Shlichus is what Rebbe wants. If I'm below that, I can naturally feel already that you could say that I'm not second class, but you can understand why someone says, you know what, I've already let the Rebbe down.
For sure, not second class. I said not even second tier.
Okay, but say
second class.
No, but I'm just saying,
for sure.
The line, the bar is so high that it's so easy to kind of sag beneath it, which of course opens up a Pandora's box of like, if I already let him down or let it down, who cares, right? So it's an important question to today. It's not just me trying to
Yeah.
excavate what
Yeah.
happened in your
Yeah.
Bacherhood. How did you and your friends deal with? Because I would imagine in some ways it was harder then. Because today, at the end of the day, the Rebbe's not here, so a Bacher can imagine that he's making the Rebbe happy, right? But in those days, you're so close to someone who is such a towering figure, so much bigger than you. You feel small. How do you deal with that and still be a happy person, right?
I have a little bit of an advantage in this, that I have predisposed to being pretty happy.
All right.
Maybe because I was the youngest in my family, and even even when I'm disappointed in myself, it usually doesn't get me down for a long any longer than a short period of time.
But were
The
you an
what?
outlier in your class? Were you like this weirdo who was happy and everybody else is depressed?
No, everybody was pretty besimcha with the Rebbe simcha. I don't know. We used to dance a lot. And we used to fabring a lot.
Yeah, there you go. So it wasn't just
So
you.
no. There was a lot of happiness. There were some people that were pretty tense because of this also. Not tense where they were crazy nervous, but they just felt a certain tenseness, like
Heavy.
can't waste. Yeah,
Heavy.
yeah. So if a person can not waste a second and keep it up, and it's in their personality, and I had a friend who would go to bed 11 o'clock every night, and he woke up 6 in the morning, and he studied 12, 14 hours a day, and he didn't want to waste a minute. And he's pretty well adjusted. Now he's married. He's a shliach. And he has kids. That worked for him. There were others where, we just had to figure out ourselves. I like that on Hollis today. It's not that they're not telling Bachram to go to movies to relax, or to go, go do some sports once a day. That's excellent. We never, to us to go, of course, when I was in 7th grade, I used to play football outside, but to go play basketball in 11th grade, Eid Mulvade, it was not an option. It was like, I'm not a bum. I'm not going to go and play basketball, and that's ridiculous. Go play 20 minutes. It's even better for learning the rest of the day. Go swimming for a half hour. I think in that way we've gained that. Even in Chassidish yeshivas, it's not so much they're giving the Bachram other options. They're saying, look, within the context of being able to be a chassid for 24 hours a day, it's not a stira, just like you take a break to take, all Bachram take naps in the middle of the day, for 20 minutes. So you'll go swimming for half hour a day. It's
right.
So in that, we didn't have that. The truth is, we were very intense in that way. But again, it worked for most of us. We were, in Al-Taeda.
There was no sense of inadequacy of
Oh, sure there was. I remember.
I mean, there was up here
No, there's no
talking about. I mean,
and especially young people. Yeah, absolutely. You know what? Now that you're jarring my memory. I remember when Shliach Kislev, we were sitting in Farbringen with the staff of Al-Taeda. I had some l'chaim.
just right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were Farbringen with our yeshiva, the staff of Al-Taeda. I was probably 16, and of course there was a certain intensity, exactly the feelings you had. So I remember I was speaking by the Farbringen. It was already, it was after some l'chaim, and it was already like 3 a.m, and I expressed some of these frustrations that you expressed. And Ephraim Pekarsky, was our manal, said, you're sitting in the stands in Yankee Stadium, and the Yankees won a World Series, and you're sitting there and saying, "But wait a second, my shirt just tore." He said, "It's Shliach Kislev. The Rebbe's healthy. Forget your issues." That's one way they dealt with it. But
I don't like that answer. I don't know do you like that
answer? If it's not
acute,
it works. If it's not chronic or acute, and it probably wasn't that deep. I mean, do I like it? It has its place. It's definitely not a full. It's not the best way to address it.
You're just pushing it all into the Rebbe. It's like I feel inadequate, and it's like just party.
Just get above it. Yeah, it works. It works in some cases, but for sure it doesn't work. I think I don't know. All members on Holla, many members on Holla today are trained or realize the importance of being able to relate to each person where they are. Maybe because the Rebbe swept us all up, then Holla just kept it, very general. If somebody had a specific problem, I told you Pekarsky what he told me if I bring it at 2 o'clock in the morning. But if I came to a member of the Holla with a personal problem, they would give me the time of day. They would, but they weren't proactively, they weren't, the opinion was the one person, his job was to call you over once every few, like, what would I tell opinion? In Vigatus, how's it going, Baruch Hashem? You learning? Yeah. You feel you can learn more? Yeah. You davening? Keep it up, whatever, or L's here.
I mean, I guess
There wasn't such a personal yachas between Dan Holla and the Bachram unless you really, really asked for it.
so you're saying today the Dan Hall has to be more aware of the Bachrim and can't just rely on the tide lifting up all
Correct.
boats.
Well said.
But so to make the question a little bit sharper, a few more minutes, to make the question a little bit sharper, it wasn't just Bachrim dealing with the Rebbe's heroes. It was also American boys dealing with. Like, did you feel at all that Lubavitch, not just the Rebbe, but the Elder Chassidim and the stories of Lubavitch from Amol and what Amol was like, and you have these Chassidim that talk about Amol in the old Timchet Mimim and back then. I'm sure there was a back then as well, right?
Of course.
And you're here in America. Did you ever feel like you're not talking our lingo, you're not talking our language, like this is not us, like these big Eidim, Timchet Mimim, that's just not who we are, or
Well, that's another very good question. So we had Alter Chassidim around, and a Mendel, and many others. I mean, not as many as there were, 15, 20 years ago when Bentzi Shem Tov was alive, or Shmuel Levittin or whatever, but we had many Alter Chassidim. Most of them, I probably even, again, I was considered Chassidish Shabbat. I probably had trouble relating to a lot of what they were saying as an American, as one I liked a little bit sports and whatever. Now Mendel had a certain. First of all, he was such a celebrity for all the right reasons, and he was so warm. He could tell a joke, and he always. He really captured our imagination a little bit. But many of the old Chassidim, not as if we didn't irritate us, but yeah, we felt like it's you're not talking to us to some extent. You asked me the question, I'm give you an honest answer.
I'm not surprised by that.
Right, so it was those days already then, and they were very good people. They were sincere. They were not speaking down to us. They were speaking because from their experiences, what they went through. And I realized if I went to yeshiva today and I started speaking, very possible I won't relate to with the Bachar Mar. And because they're and that's what Dan Holla's job is to really know where the Bachrim are on the one hand and to lift them up. Yeah.
So how did you deal with that as a Bachar growing up? How did you deal with that, like where there's this almost like they're Lubavitchers, they're the Elter Chassidim, they're sitting behind their bed Fabringen, or maybe that was the thing, they're sitting, they're not standing, therefore puzzle. No, but I don't suspect you of that kind of nonsense, but.
No.
But yeah, they're the white beards sitting by the Rebbe, right? And they're giving their cheretz and so on. But they're not talking my language. Like,
Right.
was there a question of, maybe you didn't think of it in terms of identity because the world wasn't yet so engrossed in these questions. But was there a feeling of like what kind
some of it we looked up to them for good reason. We knew that what they had done, the path they paved before us. Really, somebody like Rapinya. Rapinya was a very important person in my life. I had many years that I think that I could relate to Rapinya. He could relate to me. He was in a different world, but I know he cared, and for many years, I definitely gained from him. Even though it was in a different way, like Rabbi Yale, you can gain the actual Teichen and the Mendel, this giving over the message. But Rapinya was like a dugma chaya,
Right.
But I didn't think he could relate to me personally. I heard that at the end of his life, by the way, he used to stop guys who were like, for lack of a better word, a little bit Lubavitch light and invite him into his house. And his last 10 years of his life, he started relating suddenly to all kinds of younger people. And you know what? Because he was a real chassid. But I didn't think he could relate to me. But it didn't, I can't say it bothered me. Some of the other chassidim, they were who they were. And the Rebbe lifted us up. Some of it we had pride, like, they're better than us in some ways, and we're Deir Ashvi, They don't know how to do Mifsaim. We know how to do Mifsaim, We could get 3 kakaftas in Fifth Avenue, Manhattan. They can do it, most of them. So a mix of both. It's not that we Yeah, a lot of them we couldn't relate to, and some we were able to, and some we looked up to the extent, even if we didn't.
So
Many of them didn't speak our language even then. So let's put it that way.
does that give you looking back, now that to bring it back full circle, looking back and seeing how when you were growing up in 770, there was already then a different kind of divide or distance between the Lubavitch that you were experiencing and the Lubavitch that you were living, and the Lubavitcher that you were, and these older Chassidim with a whole different experience and a different world that they came from. And you had that back then. Does that and bringing that forward to now your son's in 770 and he's experiencing a Lubavitch that's at least as different to yours as yours was to theirs. You could say it's more different, it's less different. I don't think that's the question here. Does it give you hope that just like you were, just like you were able to figure it out for yourself, he'll be able to figure it out for himself? And I'm not talking specifically about him, but his friends and the people growing up now. Or does it make you a bit scared that that all the time there's constantly something changing, and today, well, of course, the problem that the bigger challenge that we have is that we don't have a Rebbe who is updating the program, so to speak, right? There isn't a new Mitzayim that he could do better than you, right? Everything that he has is something that you have as well, but he's for sure in a different world. So does it give you comfort knowing that there's always been a level of change, or does it make you nervous how much change there always is?
This is a question which I haven't thought that much about. But yeah, there's a lot of change, and the whole world. I saw once, the billboard, the iPhone 8.0 changes everything again. The world's changing. Lubavitch is changing. Everything is changing very fast now. But besides the fact that the principles are the same, I don't know if I thought about getting hope from our situation, but yeah, we were very different than the older Chassidim. But it could be then again, we had the Rebbe in a Guf Gashmi, face to face, who really picked us up. The Rebbe really carried us all on his shoulders. But we believe that the Rebbe is Layazav Tzemar, you see it, the Rebbe is inspiring these Bachrim in a very real way. And within their changes, and they have their friends and their groups. And if they're searching for the identity of Chabad and they're searching for the Rebbe, they'll find it. And they'll find it in their own way. And the fact that there's no new Miftzayim and no new Sichas, because it's all within the same principles anyway. The principles never changed by the Rebbe, just the manifestations. So it's within those principles, and you see very many groups of Bachrim who are very different. Forget about the divide between my generation and them. Within the groups today, they're very different, a lot of them. And many of them are finding a real path, a path to what Lubavitch is, a path to their relationship with the Rebbe. They're not all the same, like we spoke about before, So, I think I think that's not the biggest issue. There is a very strong wave from Elam Haza and the Elam Haza being in front of us, social media and everything that comes with it. That's a big challenge. There are also additional challenges, but the fact that things change as far as Lubavitch, that the older Chassidim today were pretty bad. If in a few years I'm going to be the older Chassid, and I was by the Mendel, that is a little scary. No, really.
I was going to ask you, does that
and
scare
my friends,
you?
Yes,
that scare you?
yes, but somehow the
Talk
Rebbe
about that a little bit.
No, that's a good point, and I love my friends, and some of them are your relatives, and I look up to them, but that we're going to be, Reb Mendel and Reb Nissen and the Ben Shem Tov, it's like because or who, yeah, that I'm glad Mashiach is coming for many, many reasons. Not the least of that is that. And that's why, look, Chas v'Shalom Golos goes any longer. We have a lot of challenges. I know we're talking about we have to prepare every day for the Avodah of the future, but this is all heading towards Geula, redemption with Mashiach.
But give me a reason for hope that doesn't involve the Eibusher bringing Mashiach. I mean,
Well,
because
that's not a Lubavitch question.
no,
You're saying
it's a Lubavitch
maybe you're saying like this. Okay, if we saw what happened between 80 years ago and 40 years ago and 40 years ago and 20 years ago, and here's where we are now, so we need to ask ourselves what's going to happen in 20 years, because that's the way of Torah. Of course, Mashiach is coming.
Right.
The more we can get ourselves psyched up about Mashiach. The Rebbe spoke about learning in Yoni Mashiach Gula, which also has many different manifestations. One time, and I can't say I'm definitely. I definitely need strengthening and encouragement and seriousness. And one year, I read through Rabbi Galinsky's essays. His essays in his Sefer Yemei Mashiach.
I love that Sefer.
Yeah,
I love it.
And it's on the one hand, it's very substantive, it's pilpul, but it's very readable.
Mm-hmm.
And I got it started resonating with me more. This is happening.
Never knew what he was talking about.
Yeah.
So
so you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Let's talk like this. It's a
realization that these are real topics that have been discussed for thousands of years in detail.
Yes.
And it makes it just by the fact that your mind has to deal with all these other minds grappling with these questions. You're like, wait a second, this is a real thing. This is a real question. And
well said. You have a great way of that's a great way of expressing it. Right. Right, because he brings, of course, from all the Shalos Teshuvos from different ways with it, right, and they're really complements the Rebbe's focus on these same things. It's excellent. All right, and there's many other ways of getting inspired. There's some people get inspired straight from the Sichos and Aleph and Beis. That's great, and indeed, I actually saw the. I guess this is on the record, but okay. It's not easy for me to get up and say that the Rebbe said in Parsha Shoftim that we have a Navi in our generation. I've said it in other words. It doesn't come to me so easy. But I tell you, when I saw recently the actual Haggadah, the Rebbe editing the Sichos, that Sicha, the Rebbe making changes and leaving that, almost every paragraph had changes in that paragraph, the Rebbe just leaving it, it has an effect. But to answer your question, somehow the Rebbe managed to work through the difference of the older Chassidim, of when it was all the great older Chassidim that we had in the beginning of the Rebbe's Nesius, and then later, and then in my days, and then after Gimel Tammuz, and where we are today, where it can't compare the older Chassidim today. And somehow, on the positive, all the positive things going on, the Rebbe is working through them, and the Rebbe empowered us. Every person can get a Rav and a Mashpia, and that could be for him that link. It's the Rebbe worked through this issue. So in 20 years from now, and of course we'll be then in Yerushalayim in the long time Mashiach, the Rebbe is going to have to work through us. But you know what? Who will be the Zaydi of our children? It's time to grow. It's time for myself and my generation to grow up. Yeah, in other words, we have to take. First of all, there is a lot of that. People today.
I mean, who'll be the Zaydi of your children? The answer is you. That's what I mean.
That's right. That's right.
And you're not going to miraculously change into a different person.
Right.
Right. And my guess is that those older Chassidim, they probably had similar fears also. They probably had similar, like, wait a second, we're now the white beards. Sure. Right. We're now the white beards. Like Mendel Futterfass was a young man once upon a time too.
He was a businessman.
Yeah, he was a businessman. He was a very savvy, and he comes from a family of businessmen. I mean, his father passed away before he was born, but his mother apparently was a very savvy woman.
Right.
Yeah, so like I'm sure one day they're like, wait a second, we're the big Chassidim, and I'm the guy, and I'm the mashpia, like I'm the man, and I think they even had to convince him to go be a mashpia in Kfar Chabad. I was like, well, what in the world?
Chose somebody from out of the system.
What in the world? Like I'm gonna be the guy.
Take over the Shliach Chaim.
Yeah, like what's up is right, and so like there's only one answer. What. The question is what is the hopeful answer? How can we be hopeful about that? I'm not saying not to believe Mashiach coming, but we cannot be selectively believing Mashiach coming for the things that scare us the most. Right. Yeah, you hear people say, Mirza Hashem, if Mashiach doesn't come, it's usually right before Tisha B'Av, or Gimel Tammuz, but not before the day of their Chanukah Sabayis, their $10 million Chabad house, right? They don't say that.
When the money's in the bank already.
He can come the day after that, but so I'm poking a little bit of fun, but I mean, we cannot just when things get a little bit scary, all of a sudden say Mashiach is going to come. Yes, Mashiach will hopefully come, but without relying on that, what is the hopeful?
I'm gonna add one thing, and we're getting to the end of our conversation. Just giving a little bit of historical perspective. You went on shlichus, and some people learned a little bit, had more time, had less time. The Rebbe said you should learn. I think in the last 30 years, many shluchim know they have chavrusas much more than before. They have chavrusas, and if you look like what we talk about on our WhatsApp groups, it's not only, well, first, if you have a new story of the Rebbe, some inspiring story of Tzayim, these videos, they're great. But sometimes we ask very serious questions. I'll give you an example. We had the whole discussion on my class WhatsApp group about mamutza. What does it mean that Rebbe is a mamutza based on a sikha that people learned in practical sikhas? And it was a very real discussion. And people really got into it. They read the sikha and they read the Rabbi and they thought about it. And these things happen not so infrequently. I think people we're maturing with our own responsibilities, and that we have to take hold of ourselves. We can't just get dragged along with the Aved of Lubavitch. I think much more than, I'm saying shluchim and anash also. Obviously, I'm speaking in generalities. People are learning more. People are thinking more. People are much more than, in my mind, 30 years ago.
That's a hopeful way to end the conversation. And hopefully, this conversation will be a small part of that. And again, thank you very much for doing
Bentzi,
it.
come back in the winter. It's a lot better.
I grew up in Hong Kong. This weather makes me feel right at home.
Yeah, okay.
Right at home.
All right.
Shliach The music for this podcast comes from the album Repentance Doors by Oren Sor Nadav Vachar and is used with their permission.